Hi, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's lecture sponsored by the Natalie and James Thompson Gallery at San Jose State University. Today's speaker is pioneering AR artist Tamiko Thiel. She'll give an approximately 40-minute presentation followed by Q&A. Please use the Q&A function below to post questions at any time. Tamiko Thiel was born 7 years before Kamala Harris in Oakland's Kaiser Permanente Hospital, while her parents were at UC Berkeley. She grew up mostly in Seattle and Kamakura, Japan, but lived in the Bay Area from 1974 to 1981 while attending Stanford and working at Hewlett-Packard, and then again from 1994 to 1999. She currently lives and works in Munich, Germany, where she moved in 1985 to attend the Academy of Fine Arts. Tamiko was lead product designer on the Connection Machine CM1-CM2 AI supercomputer in 1989, the fastest computer on Earth, and now in the collection of MoMA, New York. While living in San Francisco in the mid to late 1990s, she began working with virtual reality in 1994 as producer and creative director of Starbright World, the first online 3D virtual world for children, in collaboration with Steven Spielberg. Her first VR art installation, Beyond Manzanar, in 2000, is in the collection of the San Jose Museum of Art. Her recent AR commissions include Unexpected Growth in 2018 for the Whitney Museum, and Brush the Sky in 2019 for the Japanese American Museum, San Jose, and Hidden Histories of San Jose Japantown project, for which she is currently also AR artistic advisor. Her most recent works include Lend Me Your Face and Touching Traces 2020 Election Diaries. And now, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Tamiko Thiel.
Hello, you have to enable my video. I can't do it myself. Hi, can you hear me? I'm not getting any feedback whether any of you are alive out there.
We hear you. And
okay.
We see you.
Okay. You're never sure when you're just confronted with a black screen. So I should just go on and start talking? Share my screen, is that all right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. All right, so let's go here. Let's see. Okay, and I'm in the middle of it. Sorry. Oh, sorry, I got kind of out of whack with the being unsure whether or not my video is on. Okay, can you see that all? Am I full screen?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, great. All righty. Well, thanks for inviting me. Thanks, Rhonda, for setting this whole thing up. And I'll talk a little bit more about Rhonda's involvement in a project later down. But I did start out as a product design engineer, getting a Stanford product design degree back in 1979, and worked in Silicon Valley at Hewlett-Packard as a product design engineer, and took 2 products actually to market during that time. But that got a little bit boring. And so I felt like I needed to get out of Silicon Valley and see a bit more of the world, moved to MIT and did my master's there in mechanical engineering. But halfway through, I discovered the courses that became the MIT Media Lab after I had already graduated, and decided on the spot that I wanted to actually become a media artist. And there weren't really classes for media artists at that point, so I wasn't really sure how to go about this. But I figured I'd go to, once I graduated, I'd go to art school, except that a friend of mine, Danny Hillis, kind of got in the way. He was doing his PhD at the MIT AI lab, designing a massively parallel supercomputer for artificial intelligence research that he called the connection machine. So he asked me really a couple of days after the commencement ceremony, after I graduated, if I would come to his new startup and be in charge of the product design. We were all pretty young. Danny and I are about the same age. We were about 25, 26 at that point. And so this was a pretty amazing endeavor for, that time of my life. And this is what the machine turned into. That's about an hour's lecture in itself. But basically, the machine was called the connection machine because in those days, the supercomputers would have usually one, at the most a couple of processors, and Danny wanted to build one with more than 64,000 very simple processors, figuring that if the human brain with a huge number of very simple neuron cells could produce intelligence, then maybe that sort of structure had some sort of properties that we were really missing going with single processor computers. The machine did turn out to be the fastest machine in the world in the year 1989. These titles are usually only good for about a year, and then someone else beats you the next year. And the performance of the CM2 in 1989 is about the performance of an iPhone 5, which probably none of you would even deign to use these days. So that gives you an idea of how much things have changed. And the machine really did cost $3 to $5 million at that point. And you can see that basically we left the doors translucent so that the status lights, which are usually at the processor chips you can see on the left, were on the edge and showed through. And you could program them, but basically, they could be blinking however you wanted. But the idea that I had was that this would show the machine, so to speak, thinking, that you could see the internal life of the machine. The machine is, if you read on the internet, is largely considered to be a failure because the company went bankrupt in the mid-90s. But as I found out when I went back to interview my friends who had worked on the machine with me, it turns out Google co-founder Sergey Brin learned how to parallel program on a CM2 when he was an undergraduate, and that his MapReduce algorithm, which together with the PageRank algorithm are the basis for Google's success as a search machine, is based on Danny Hillis's parallel programming alpha mapping beta reduction paradigm. It turns out also, I found out in 2010, Google bought Danny's follow-on company MetaWeb, which was doing semantic networks, and Danny's co-founder, John Giannandrea, went on to become head of Google's AI. So really, I found out something that really is not known at all, that the software and hardware from thinking machines really flowed into especially Google's technology, and thereby influenced the AI that we're using today. I also had known for quite a long time that the visual design of the machine had influenced Steve Jobs, because a friend of mine, Joanna Hoffman, worked for him as his right hand, first on the very first Macintosh, and then when he was starting up the Next Cube. And she had told me at some point years later that when the connection machine came out in 1986 and Steve Jobs saw photographs of it, he immediately said to her, bring me the designer of the connection machine. I want them to do my Next Cube. And Joanna said, well, Tamiko's gone off to Europe to become an art student, and I have no contact information for her, because in those days, most people in Germany didn't have emails. So I don't know, my life could have turned out differently. But if you look at Jobs' designs before the Next Cube and from the Next Cube on, you see a radically different sense of visual design. And Museum of Modern Art when they were interested in inquiring. One of them, that was, of course, the information that was the key to saying, okay, we want this in the collection because it has influenced the design of all of Steve Jobs' products. So that was, of course, you can imagine, really a highlight of my life. It turned out to be the year that I turned 60 years old. So I waited 30 years for this to happen, more than 30 years for this to happen. So don't give up. If you do something in your young years that you think is really important, then, you know, you might get validation if you live long enough. So I really did cut out of that whole MIT startup crowd, went to Germany. Like I said, no one was on internet. It was basically a complete cutoff from my earlier life. And you might see a little bit of that shock in this photograph of me from the first couple of weeks of becoming an art student in Germany. But as time went on, I started looking into the sort of fascination for technology that I've always had, first in this multimedia installation that had a cassette buried inside of the muffler making car engine noises, and then moving on into video as I got interested in the moving image and the concept of how do you create how do you hold the tension of a strong composition, not in just one image, but over 5, 10, 15 or longer time span of a video. But I was also from the start working on installations. I wanted the spatiality of images within a physical context. I did a video sculpture when I was in the Bay Area. I came back to the Bay Area in 1994 and was working in video. And this sculpture was actually shown in San Jose in the Chick Tech exhibit that was back in, I think, 1997. But I found as I went on with video that I wanted to have more and more monitors, and it just was not feasible at that point because monitors were expensive, VHS tape decks were expensive, and projectors were prohibitively expensive. So it turns out at that time I was working for a company called Worlds Incorporated, because the technology that was used to do 3D interactive online virtual worlds before this time had to run on $100,000 workstations. And then there were some changes in the technology that meant it could run on merely very expensive PCs instead. So we were, our company Worlds Incorporated was building online virtual worlds, a lot like Mozilla Hubs or the other online chat programs, but this was back in 1994. So we didn't have audio, we didn't have video, we just had text chat. This was my avatar at the time, and we at this company at Worlds Incorporated, we actually didn't have full 3D avatars either. But it was a really interesting technology where you take photographs or make drawings of, you know, people or whatever your avatar needs to be from different sides, and depending on the angle between the user and the avatar, you show them a different viewpoint. And mine was a static avatar, but in the Starbright World project that I was producing at that time, we actually had what seemed to be moving 3D avatars. That was called the Starbright World project. It was the brainchild of Steven Spielberg, who was the chair of the Starbright Foundation at that time, working together between Hollywood, the medical profession, high tech and computer games industry to try and use this technology to enhance the quality of life for seriously ill children. So the photograph you see, I'm the one standing in the middle. Steven Spielberg is sitting in the middle, and you can see maybe from the little girl, she's bald because she has cancer, and she was only 2 years old. So the idea that Spielberg had was to make virtual worlds that the kids could go to, even if they were stuck in hospitals. But the doctors were clear, please no stereo VR headsets, because these kids have nausea anyway from their medication. They don't need the additional nausea that comes from VR. So we wanted to make the technology available then just on regular monitors, keyboards, mice, in the playrooms of the hospitals, so the kids would want to come out of their bed and meet each other and go into these virtual worlds, and also keep an eye out, of course, for E.T., who was Steven Spielberg's Avatar. So at the height of this project, we had 5 children's hospitals connected across the length and breadth of the USA, but the technology was still unstable, and at some point they got kind of tired of having to boot the machines so often and took it offline and just made CD-ROM games and that sort of thing instead. Too bad, but it was a really interesting start in these 3D worlds, and you can see how low res it was. It was 640 by 480 back then. So together with another producer, Zara Hushmans, she and I were talking the whole time about how can we use this technology for our own art. And the project that grew out of that is called Beyond Manzanar, and the first edition is in the San Jose Museum of Art collection. They've shown it many times, actually the most recent one being in 2019 to 20 in a show of digital art from the Permanente collection. So also drawing on my experience with the Starbright World project, I realized I wanted to address a very large audience. For instance, all Japanese Americans who had been imprisoned in the Manzanar internment camp at some point in their lives, and the families that have maybe never talked with them about this experience. So this piece really worked as a bridge project where, the older people who had been there could talk about it with their younger grandkids who had, how do you tell your grandkid that, when you were their age that you were in a prison camp? It's really hard. But if the kid is grabbing the joystick and running off through the world, then you can start talking about, yes, and that's where I lived, and that's what it looked like and sounded like. So the level that Zara Hushman brought in was that parallel level, saying this is not just something that happened to the Japanese Americans. This sort of thing, in turning a whole group just on the basis of their ethnicity, without them having done any crime at all, was threatened to Iranian Americans also during the Iranian hostage crisis in 79-80. And we found a whole archive of newspaper articles that talked, where Japanese Americans were talking about how similar the hostility, how similar the public opprobrium was to that what they felt in World War II. So we had a lot of very surrealistic devices in the virtual world. You have not just barbed wire surrounding the camp, but you're also surrounding the entire camp with headlines from the wartime, showing that you're in prison not just by the physical barbed wire, but also by the public opinion, and then drawing this parallel level with the article excerpts in the Iranian American experience. And we didn't want to make just a negative experience, because, in a museum setting, you wander in and you can wander right back out. So I always try to alternate what I call positive spaces and negative spaces, emotionally negative, emotionally positive spaces. So we put gardens in the camp, and it turns out that the Japanese Americans really did build gardens in the camps in order to, alleviate the bleakness of their existence. And if you have the same mountains, but it's surrounded by a Japanese garden, or in our fantasy level, an Iranian garden, then you can believe for a short time that you're in paradise. But it turns out when you go into these gardens, your own movement makes the gardens disappear. You fall from paradise back into the prison camp. And this is really the sort of interactivity that you can have in virtual reality that you can't have in film, you can't have in a still image. And that was really important to us to build in. This might seem very commonplace to you, but remember, this is 1984, I'm sorry, 1994, 95. The technology that we were using then developed and matured into the 3D games technology that you might use yourself, but it was really at the beginning of that time. I went on to make other pieces with this, The Travels of Mariko Horo, a reverse Marco Polo journey where I collide Buddhist imagery and Christian imagery, all centered at the site of the city of Venice being fantasized from the viewpoint of a Japanese time-traveling artist. And of course, there's various heavens and hells. And it was really an interesting research finding out that a lot of the images that showed, for instance, here, the very brightly colored image, The Last Judgment, exist in exactly that same form, that exact same coloration in Tibetan tankas and in Eastern European Orthodox Christian depictions of the Last Judgment. So the third piece that I did, and these all are being shown as large projections because the helmets at the time were really, really lousy. So a large projection that goes all the way down to the floor, but is wide enough so that it fills your peripheral vision was enough to give a sense of immersion, especially if you're moving through, as you're moving through the piece. So the third piece I did with this technology was Virtuelle la Mauer, reconstructing the wall, where we reconstructed about a linear kilometer of the Berlin Wall, the death strip between the east wall and the west wall, and the neighborhoods on the side. And then, of course, the very different experience you have in West Berlin, where you can walk up to the wall, you can paint it with graffiti. If you walk up to the wall on the east side, then the Volkspolizei pop up and arrest you and interrogate you. And we did have an interrogation scene that if you went up to the wall too many times, you get interrogated each time. And after that, you have an emotional aversion to doing that. So we're trying to use that to give you a sense of why the people in East Berlin didn't just break out, because there were serious consequences when they even got close to the wall. So this piece actually, actually all these three pieces can be shown in the VR headsets of our day now, but I used a lot of very flat imagery for the earlier ones. The Berlin Wall piece is pretty much three-dimensional. The characters are three-dimensional, and I've had a very interesting experience the very first time that I ran it in a VR headset, because I programmed every single one of these pieces. I did all the programming. I knew exactly when what would happen and where. And so I march off towards the east wall, and I know exactly what's going to happen. These guys are going to pop up and surround me. And yet, when that happened, the first time when I'm wearing a VR helmet, I screamed out loud, even though I knew it would happen. But that for me really said, okay, there is something about the stereo presence. There is a difference between seeing it on a flat screen. But on a flat screen, you can also make vast worlds with multiple heavens, multiple hells, and you can travel around in those worlds without getting car sick. So there are pluses and minuses to each side. I think I need to speed up a little bit. So the first new piece that I did in the current type of stereo VR technology was as a Google VR tilt brush artist in residence, a piece called Land of Cloud that is also a sound piece. So each of these figures is murmuring their own mantra, and you have to walk around and put your head into the head of the figure in order to really hear what they're saying. And it turns out each figure has its own mantra, a male voice reciting Trump's slogans from his candidacy in 2016, and the female voice repeating Hillary Clinton's, but the whole effect, because of the whispering, is apparently very soothing until you get into the heads of the figures and realize what they're saying. I'm just going to go through, otherwise we won't have time. I was working also for about a year as a guest artist on a piece by Karolina Markowitz and Pascal Piron. We just heard that it won the award for the best immersive VR at a San Jose-based festival. I'm not allowed to say this in public, so I'm not going to tell you what festival, but it's based in San Jose, and it's going to run from the March 20th to March 30th. There's no physical presence. I'm hoping that they show them somehow online, but it's possible they won't even do that. But the content of this piece is that you're a refugee child being transported through a war zone. And Carolina and Pascal work as teachers in Luxembourg. And this is really the experiences of one of many of their students who has a refugee background. He was transported in a pickup, but actually inside of a wooden crate. And here you see the slats of the crates exploding, because after a short, so to speak, realistic sequence, he comes into a time of great danger. And he told Carolina and Pascal what he did. He was inside this crate. He couldn't get away. And you, in the installation version, would also be in a wooden crate, but with the VR helmet on. So at those points of great danger, he started reciting a poem that his mother had taught him. And at that point, we transit into my dream sequences. So there's the vague figure of the mother who is reciting the poem with him, and giving him the sort of emotional support that also back in the Manzanar piece, we were using the image of the gardens, and the gardens that you can enter, but not too far, as a way of going back to your roots, your culture, your family, your past, and using that to hold on to your sanity and your emotions when you're in a situation that's out of your control. So there's other scenes in different parts of the piece, but always the dream sequences bring back the poem and put you in a very abstract, expansive atmosphere that provides, again, if you think of what I said about the Beyond Manzanar piece, this alternate between a negative emotional space and a positive emotional space. So I'm really hoping that this gets spread around a little bit more. It's almost through with the festival circuit, and I hope it'll be distributed so people can actually see it finally. So this, after about doing three large pieces in VR, I was pretty worn out, because each of these pieces took about 5 years. That included, research and fundraising. And then when I finally got funds, there's like 2 years of production. Like I said, I had to do all the programming. No one else was really interested in working in this type of virtual reality at that point. So some pieces like Mariko Horo, I did pretty much everything. And I was totally burned out. And there was a really hard year in 2010 when basically every single grant I applied for, every single exhibit I applied for, turned me down. It was really like 1 year of just one refusal after another. And this was after I had been on this role where, especially with the Berlin Wall piece, the Goethe Institute sent me to India on a 2-month tour. They sent me to the US on a tour. And I thought, okay, I'm riding high. And then nothing, absolutely nothing. And I was so depressed. And then out of the blue, in October, I get this email from a friend, Mark Skworek, who was also doing VR. And he said, hey, we're going to do an intervention in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. We're not asking their permission, but send me some 3D content and I'll put it up for you. And we're using geolocative AR. So I sent him my piece, Art Critic Face Matrix, that a face that seems to be screaming, "This is not art and never will be art." And I wasn't able to go because it was like only a week after Mark sent me the invitation, but he and a whole bunch of his friends were able to put together a flash mob. And we were off and running. And not only that, but the Museum of Modern Art actually found out about this intervention the day before, because it was a perfectly public part of the Conflux Festival of Psychogeography. And what did they do? They tweeted it. So you can imagine this was the best publicity we could have had. And we were off and running and said, oh my God, we've got to make an artist group, manifest.ar. And what's the next thing we do? Well, I live in Europe, and every time the Venice Biennial comes around, I take this beautiful train ride through the Alps from Munich down to Venice. And I said, hey, I'm going to lead an intervention into the Venice Biennial. Who wants to come? So 7 of the other artists from the group came. Sandra Wienhoff did this intervention where it looked like we took over their website. And it turns out we weren't the only group doing this, but we found that the people from the Share Festival were also doing it. So we banded together, made this postcard. You see the 2 sides of the postcard there on the right. And basically, you know, our combined networks were large enough, so we got a lot of publicity for this. And frankly, you know, the intervention into MoMA, the intervention into the Venice Biennial were what really got us into the history books on augmented reality art, and really, you know, made a name for us. We've all gone our separate ways, but that was really, really a very euphoric time. Here's a piece of mine on censored artists in Piazza San Marco, and then in the Giardini, where you usually only get in as an artist if you've been, you know, you've been selected by one of the top curators of the world. So we were off and running and did a lot more interventions. This one, also organized by Mark Skwarek, was as part of the AI Occupy Wall Street. So that was, you know, after the big financial crash, millions of people lost their homes, the banks were propped up, and the people who had lost their homes were left to basically get by as well as they could. So there was a lot of anger. There were protests in front of the stock exchange, and so they barricaded the whole area. They had mounted police. You could not protest there. So basically, we were putting our AR, geolocating it right there, and using it as sort of a visual meme that people could look at and send and share. So for instance, there were protests going around the world at that point. And so friends of mine from Australia sent me images. People sent images from Japan. And then I took some of the Trump Tower when I got back to New York. And I think I'm running out of time. So there's other ways that I've used the same type of imagery, but in a different sense. So here as good luck coins, and I would get participants to write on a whiteboard, oh, how much do you need to be happy? And then I'd take an augmented photo of them, print it out with a small printer on the spot, and give it to them as a good luck charm. I did this also in Singapore, where I had a guest professorship, doing it during the Chinese New Year time with good luck coins, and using the red money packets to basically frame the photographs. So one goes up on the wall as part of the decoration, the other one you get to take home in your red money packet. I also been doing a lot of climate focused ones, 01 Biennial 2012, Searching for Silicon Valley. I found out that the cloud was coming up at that point, and everyone was saying, oh, we'll just put everything in the cloud, it's so clean. But Greenpeace found out that at that point, the cloud computing was was not using renewable energy. Apple only used 15% renewable energy. So I put these clouds colored depending on the percentage of renewable resources that they used for their cloud computing facilities. Google was one of the better ones, but only was below 40%. It's gotten substantially better since then, but mostly because Greenpeace made this very public. So, FACT Liverpool engaged Manifestar to work with biosensors. So myself and Will Pappenheimer worked with this heart rate monitor. He got some money from his university, so we could write an app where your heart was, the heart beats according to your heartbeat. And you can be an indiginator, planting indigenous plants, or an exoticator, planting invasives. And as you walk through the city, if you maintain the optimal heart rate, then you're planting these big bunches of plants. And so here's our map of how we covered Liverpool in both indigenous and invasive plants. Around that time, I came across this map that shows, okay, if we're going to like around, +5 Fahrenheit global warming in 2050 or so, follow that back, and you'll see that we are then between 3 and 5 million years ago. In 2050, the climate will reach a point where the temperatures are like they haven't been for 3 million years. The human being has been around for around 200,000 years. We've never been in this situation before. You guys know this a lot better now. Back when I started showing this, it really wasn't so common knowledge, but that's what we're working for, and that's why it's important that we keep our eye on the ball here. So I got this commission from the Seattle Art Museum and to do Gardens of the Anthropocene, looking at what plants might survive the change in climate in the Seattle area. So bullwhip kelp that I put flying way above the head to give you an idea that the water might be rising. These farewell to spring that when you look at them, they enlarge and they have these little fingers that look like Venus flytraps, and these antennas that are in the middle that are sucking the energy out of your smartphones. And this is, by the way, this was the best way to advertise the piece. These 7-foot kiosks, big images showing what you can see if you download our app, and it worked really well. The Seattleites are really engaged mobile phone users. So I found out also that the giant red algae are becoming a plague on all coasts, producing their toxins, not only on the West Coast, but in the East Coast, here in New York Harbor. So I can show these things inside as well, often on an iPad. The people come into the gallery, they see a framed picture and they say, oh, that's art. And they go up and look at it. So, and the fact that it's AR and not a painting or something, they only realize after they look closely. So then in 2018, I got a commission from the Whitney to cover the whole 6th floor terrace with an AR piece. And you might know if you've worked with AR that image trigger or SLAM tends to be fairly localized, but I'm still working a lot with geolocative AR where I can easily cover a pretty large amount of room. So what did we do? We put the Whitney underwater and we put this very colorful, cheerful coral reef on it. And it looks colorful. People go and, oh, this looks great. And then they look closer and say, oh my gosh, it's all made out of plastic garbage. So this is also an idea of mine that I try and seduce people into engaging with it, and then give them a little bit of a punch under, under the belt when they really start engaging with it. With unexpected growth, also over the course of a day, as more and more people download it, then it bleaches over time. So each person is not bleaching a lot, but you know, when there's a whole lot of you all doing it, then by the end of the day it can turn white. So yeah, and this just shows the setup, that they had large iPads that you could take in your hand. We've gone on to do other ones with large projections, which I really love. And it's an AR projection, so you might not. The guy in the red shirt there is my husband, and he's standing in front of an iPad. You can see that the woman and her child are in the view of the AR app, and so they become part of the installation. I've done this on the monumental scale, projecting it on a building. This is an app where if you can guide the schools of fish around, but the more you guide them around, the more they turn into plastic. And I did it in a gallery version where I covered really all the walls and the ceiling with plastic garbage. And the projection was essentially sort of this hole it made the whole thing into a sort of a cave of plastic garbage. And again, anyone in the exhibit becomes part of the installation. How are we doing on time? I almost think we're running out of time, are we? What does that mean?
We're at 12:40, so. Okay,
so I'll wrap it up. This is Mozilla Hubs. So the company Cyan Planet that does a lot of work to publicize the state of the oceans, created this really beautiful space in Mozilla Hubs with a 360 of underwater fish feeding on a coral reef and this big pink sponge in the middle, and said, would you like to do an art installation? So what do? I fill it with plastic. And this was, right after the beginning of the coronavirus lockdown, when all of a sudden, the streets in Munich are usually pretty clean, and all of a sudden there's like all of these masks and throwaway gloves lying around on the streets. So again, outside you have a really beautiful, soothing atmosphere, and then you go inside and you've got a really colorful, pretty installation. But if you look a bit closer, there's all these masks and gloves falling from the ceiling. So just a quick thing to wrap it up. Actually, wait a minute. I need to wrap it up. I'm sorry. I'm going to skip over this a couple of pieces and talk about the project that I'm doing with Rhonda, where I did this project called Brush the Sky in Seattle, where I took places that were of importance to my family's history as Japanese Americans in Seattle. And then my mother made calligraphy for each of these places, and we placed them around the city in different locations. So each one is telling a different story. I sort of think of this as being a 21st century version of how East Asians have enhanced landscape paintings with calligraphy and with poems. So a friend of mine, Susan Hayase, with whom I was a roommate while we were working at Hewlett-Packard, said, well, your grandmother was born in Sunnyvale. Your great-grandparents had a farm down here. Your grandmother and your grandfather married in San Jose at the Wesley United Methodist Church, where my grandfather was a young pastor. Can we bring this project to San Jose, Japantown, and use Brush the Sky? Here's the Wesley United Methodist Church in the current version, with calligraphy from my mother, and they asked me to do this as the inspiration for basically starting a project using AR in San Jose, Japantown, to tell the stories not just of the Japanese Americans, but also the Chinese Americans and Filipino Americans who have made this area their home for generations. And so we started the Hidden Histories project. Susan Hayase and her husband Tom Izu, the founders and directors. These are the 9 artists who've been chosen to get the commission. Some of them might be in the audience, or you might know them. And Rhonda has very kindly been helping with tutorials on Unity, so I don't have to like do all this myself. And we're hoping that Rhonda's students might be able to help us develop the app. We have an open source app that we're using for this, where we're trying to develop a community that can help us develop it further and create an app that will survive no matter what happens to all these large technology companies that pop up, try and sell you something for a couple of years and then say, oh, well, that didn't work. We're going to discontinue the platform that you've used to do all your art on. This has happened to about 5 different companies that I've been, whose technology I've used in the course of my 10 years as an AR artist. So I think I'll just leave it at that, and hope that that's a good segue into any questions you might have. So I'll stop sharing and hope that we still have time. Yes, we have time.
We do have time. Thank you so much, Tamiko, for that wonderful talk and for introducing us to your full body of work. And there are a lot of comments in the chat, just, people are really
28. Oh my God.
People are really excited to hear more about your work. It looks like we have, I just saw a question right off the bat that I wanted to start off with, from Danielle Simbiera, who writes, AR is a poetic way of preserving people and culture along a long time frame. How can we preserve those stories on technology platforms in decades or centuries to come?
Right, and that's exactly the point of this Arpoise app. It was really a problem because I had been using the LayAR app since 2010. And then, of course, like right in 2018, I get the commission from the Whitney, and I check in with LayAR and say, okay, I'm going to need to be able to access your servers. Is there going to be any problems in this? Saying, yes, we're going to be shutting them off at the end of the year. And so, luckily my husband's a software developer, and he had been following, my work and all these potential problems of exactly this thing happening. And so he said, okay, I'll take a month off from my paid day job and see if I can build you an app that duplicates essentially the function so that the artworks can be transferred over. And he did. And that meant that we could take the commission. And that's the app that we use to do Unexpected Growth. It's being archived at the Whitney. We've actually already migrated Unexpected Growth to the Arpoise open source platform that came out of that. And that's the platform that we're using with the Hidden Histories projects. And, I told them, look, this is a little bit clumsy to use. It'll be harder for your artists to use, but it's under our control. As long as Peter and I and the Whitney are alive, we will keep the platform alive. And so if you only want to do something really quick for 3 months or 2 years, by all means, go out and use those, use Snapchat or whatever. But if you want to have it for 10 or 20 or longer years, then we're hoping that Arpoise will be a platform that will survive that time. And of course, the more people we get involved with it, and if we can ever get someone who can help Peter with the development, because, he's got to earn money for us too.
So that's, something that San Jose might be helping with. There is, Elena and I are also in the process of developing a proposal for a grant to also develop on New Art City, a digital archive, and that's all WebGL. And it's just, JavaScript, HTML, CSS. And so if we can integrate VR and AR, the libraries are there. We just need, developers to work on it.
Fantastic.
It's more or less forever, right? There's no app to download. It's all web, like editor, web-based. viewing ship. So I'd love to talk. That's a conversation for later. But I'd love to talk to you about that.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
Great. Well, I'll encourage any of you to post questions in the Q&A or in the chat below. I did have a question, and also let me just start by saying congratulations for your festival win for My Identity Is This Expanse. It really looks like a beautiful work, and I do hope that many of us will be able to experience it. I guess, one of the things that I was really struck by in the first half of your talk is the way in which you use AR to, within an institutional setting like a museum, as a space for both visualizing history and collective memory, but also navigating trauma. And I wonder how that has changed kind of over the years, right? Between the 2000 piece on Manzanar and this piece in 2020. Are your viewers now kind of more accustomed to the experience? As you say yourself, even, as the builder, the person programming all this, there's still moments of surprise. And so how do you deal with the unexpected emotions and the unexpected reactions, considering you never know who's going to be experiencing that work?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, at some point I when I look into the store on any of my VR devices, I get the impression like zombie games are the most prevalent form of VR out there. And I'm not a zombie person. I don't like scary things. But we try, as you say, a lot of pieces that I've worked on do deal with trauma, and part of that is like I say, this alternation of space with positive emotion and negative emotions, because of course that's also how people deal with trauma in real life, is trying to find a position of strength, a position of stability. Emotional, cultural, mental stability of your personality, on which you can stand in order to confront this trauma. So, I'm not interested in pushing you into well, there's a zombie coming at you and he's going to like bite your head off. I'm not interested in going into that. I think there's plenty of trauma that you get just by putting in very interesting how your sense of body and your sense of being trapped can be fairly easily invoked. In Beyond Manzanar, you walk through a door into a barrack, the door closes behind you, and all of a sudden you can't get out. And even that, I mean, it's harmless, right? You can always just take that headset off. But still, it produces an emotional reaction, and so after that, I try and provide an experience that somehow gives you respite from that, and this is also taking you through a roller coaster of a dramatic arc that has peaks and valleys. That if you have a piece of music that is only full on like punk or heavy metal or so, it can be very energizing if you like that, but it can also be very tiring. So like in classical music, you have periods of great turbulence, and then it goes then into a quiet valley of lyricism. We also try and do that in our experiences. And I think that's also, like I said, very necessary in a museum setting, where if they don't like it, they just go to the next piece. It's not like you're in a theater and you're stuck there in the war and you're going to have to see the war out until they, turn up the lights and open the doors. So remember what sort of situation you're showing in, and that you can't necessarily expect the same perseverance on the side of your your audience if they can just walk out at any time.
Can I follow up on that? There is another Q&A question. Is that okay? Did that, I mean, like part of that, the way that you talk about that kind of mediation between the kind of intense and trauma potentially inducing and kind of moments of rest and kind of contemplation, is that something that came through kind of like compositional analysis, the way that you use that analogy, or is that also like a result of working with the medical industry in some of your other projects?
Yeah, I would actually have to say it came through my own analysis. My father's work in architecture and urban planning was very much about looking at sequential experiences while moving through spaces from a first-person perspective. And I pretty much use his work as the basis of my theory. And so he got me looking at the question of how do you create emotion? I was actually doing this in my videos also. How can I create essentially an abstract video that provokes emotion in the viewer without having some sort of story of, the standard heteronormal boy meets girl, girl loses boy, and etc. And there's this great book from 1952, Emotion and Meaning in Music by Leonard B. Meyer, which apparently is still a classic in the music theory, that where he looks at how music with abstract entities, notes, can provoke so much emotion. And it's about setting up expectations. So, you're in a certain type of space where you expect certain things could happen. And then you play around with that. You surprise it, you fulfill it, you take it in some sort of twist. And so from the beginning, when I was working with video, I was looking at these texts that talked about this sort of dynamic arc. And Brenda Laurel's, Computers as Theater was where I first saw the Freytag diagram of the rising action, the climax, and then the falling action. So those were things that I was developing on my own because no one wanted to talk about this sort of thing back in the back in the 90s and the noughties. Now everyone's talking about it, and they're all like pioneers and experts, but it's like, okay, where were you guys 20 years ago when I was trying to find people with whom I could talk about this, and no one was interested in talking about emotion, much less about dramatic structure.
Well, we have time for one more question here in the Q&A. It's from Dante Livingston, who writes, having seen so many technologies develop and make their way into more mainstream uses, are there any obscure, new, futurist technologies you're interested in using for your art next?
Oh, interesting. I don't think, I don't know if I have my finger on any obscure ones. I mean, I think what I skipped over in this presentation is that I started working with deepfake AI technology, partially because I felt like I needed to, I started out working on this AI machine, and now everything's come to pass, and so I wanted to somehow close the circles. So I'm looking at that, and I have a piece called Lend Me Your Face, and there's an online version, Go Fake Yourself, which you can access on your smartphone and upload your own face. And just like in the last day or so, this MyHeritage, I think it's called MyHeritage site, has gone viral, and they're using it. It could even be exactly the same framework because the researcher put it on GitHub. Anyone can download it and use it. So they're using someone's making like videos that go like, and then you upload your photograph of your grandmother as a 13-year-old, and then she goes like and stuff like that. And I use much more radical ones of like Obama saying, yes, we can. Yes, we can. and Trump going like, it's a miracle, it'll just disappear. And those are much harder to track, and you get more distortions. But I think it's really interesting to play around with this thing, not in the sense of, oh, look, I can animate my grandmother's face, or, oh, look, I can animate like everyone from Game of Thrones, so they're doing singing the same song. But hey, I can take your face and I can have your face be parroting people you may or may not like. I mean, maybe you like Greta Thunberg, but you don't like Trump. But, maybe you're a big fan of Boris Johnson and you can't stand David Attenborough. So I try and create this mix where some of the people who are driving your face, you will be 100% behind, you'll be in favor of, and other ones are going like, oh no, please, not that person. And again, trying to produce this mix of emotions, which makes it much more personal and much more problematic that my face is being used in a way out of my control. If it's just someone else's face, even if it's my grandmother's face, and especially if it's like some film actor's face, I don't care. It's just fun. If it's my face and it's saying things that, maybe I don't believe in, and it's parroting someone who I don't like, then it's very different. And then if you're parroting someone who you really, really think is, saving our planet, then you realize, okay, it's the same technology, but it can either make me feel like this, I believe in this, and this is what I want to say, or, oh my God, get this person out of my life and get them away from my face. So again, these mixed emotions are, I think, what in art is really the strongest thing. Are people running out the doors? We've just hit the hour.
No, they're still here. I think they're hanging on to your every word. It's been a pleasure having you here, hearing about your work and having this time for conversation as well. Also, thank you to Rhonda, who's been posting a whole syllabus worth of readings in the chat.
I know. Can I get a copy of this?
Yes, I was thinking the same thing. So all students in attendance, I hope that you will follow up and read all of this work. Some really interesting things here. And we really look forward to seeing Hidden Histories, that project, develop, and being back in San Jose in person to see that as well as to seeing more of your work in the future. So thank you, Tamiko, so much. Thank you, Rhonda, for being here. And thank you to all of our attendees today. It's been a wonderful afternoon for us, evening for you in Germany.
Right, and the crypto art is something that I am starting to look into, especially with Memo Akten's diagram of like how awful it is. So yeah, I need to look into proof of stake rather than a proof of work, and does the Matic Polygon side chains really reduce the load down? So actually that's one technology that I'm kind of looking at right now, but it's just started.
And that's one that I think if we, kind of investigate this digital archive platform, because it's all, web-based, there's nothing to, container to hold the work. And that's actually something that I'm interested in researching further for this digital archive.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, it protects the artists. And so anyway.
Oh, and you know that Arpoise is in the Arctic Vault.
Oh, good.
Yes. So we are not only in Whitney's archive, we are in the Arctic Vault that's archiving GitHub in the North Pole, where of course the ice is melting very quickly, so it might not be as stable as we hoped. Well, but yeah.
I did post, if anybody's still on, I did post a link to Arpoise. There are some demos from Tamiko on there. It's up and running with the most recent versions, Corrective OS.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tamiko.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and Rhonda, we've got a lot of follow-on.
I know. I feel like yeah. All right. We'll follow up offline. Elena, thank you so much for hosting.
Thank you.
Elena, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon, good evening.
Okay, bye now.
Bye.